I was in the kitchen of my own house, preparing Sunday lunch as I had always done for over 30 years, when my daughter-in-law walked through the front door without knocking, as if she owned the place. She didn't even greet me. She simply threw her designer bag on the living room sofa and came straight to where I was, her high heels making that annoying sound on the ceramic floor that I myself had chosen and paid for when I renovated the house 5 years ago. Mariana always had this habit of entering without warning, of acting as if everything that was mine was also hers. But that day there was something different in the air, a tension I could feel even before she opened her mouth. She stopped in the kitchen doorway, crossed her arms over her chest, and looked me up and down with that expression of superiority I already knew so well. I was wearing my floral apron, the one my late husband Roberto had given me on our 20th wedding anniversary, and I had flour on my hands because I was preparing the dough for the Swiss roll that my son Daniel had loved since he was a child. Mariana stood there watching me in silence for a few seconds, as if evaluating every detail of the scene, and then she said those words I will never forget. "You don't know your place, Donna Celia," she said with a coldness that cut me like a knife. That phrase echoed in my kitchen like thunder, and for a moment I was paralyzed, with my hands still dirty with flour, looking at that woman who had entered my family 5 years earlier and who had since been trying to remove me from the center of my son's life. My heart raced, but I said nothing. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my apron, and waited for her to continue, because I knew she wasn't finished. Mariana took 2 steps into the kitchen, her dark eyes fixed on mine, and continued with that controlled but poison-filled tone. "Daniel and I are going to have a barbecue here next Sunday, and I need you to understand something once and for all," she said, emphasizing each word. "This is no longer your house. It's your son's house and my house. You live here out of our generosity, so it would be good to learn to respect our decisions and stop acting as if you owned everything." I felt my blood boil, but I kept my calm. This wasn't the first time Mariana had made comments like that, but it was the first time she had the courage to be so direct, so cruel, so disrespectful to my face. I could have responded in kind. I could have shouted. I could have put her in her place. I could have reminded her that that house was mine, bought with the sweat of my work and my late husband's, that I had raised Daniel alone after Roberto died of a massive heart attack when my son was only 15 years old, that I had worked as a seamstress for years to provide education and food for him, that I had given up rebuilding my life to dedicate myself completely to my only son. I could have said so many things, but I said nothing. I just looked at her with a neutral expression, turned off the stove, and took off my apron with slow and deliberate movements. Mariana seemed satisfied with my silence, interpreting it as submission, as defeat. She gave a half smile and turned her back to return to the living room. But before leaving the kitchen, she still had the audacity to say that I should clean everything up and leave the kitchen organized because she was going to bring friends over for coffee there the following afternoon. I didn't respond. I just watched her leave, the sound of her heels moving away down the hallway, and then I sat down in the kitchen table chair, that same chair where I had bottle-fed Daniel when he was a baby, where I had helped him do homework throughout his childhood, where I had cried so many times after Roberto died. It was at that moment, sitting in that chair with the smell of the tomato sauce I was preparing still in the air, that I made a decision. A decision that would change everything. A decision that Mariana could never imagine. Because she thought she knew my place, but she had no idea who I really was, what I was capable of, and especially had no idea where I was going. I got up from the chair with renewed determination, grabbed my cell phone that was on the counter, and opened the drawer where I kept some important documents. There at the bottom, underneath old bills and receipts, was a brown envelope that I hadn't opened in over a year. Inside it were papers that could change everything, papers I had kept as a kind of insurance, never imagining that one day I would really need to use them. But Mariana had crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. She had disrespected me in my own house, had questioned my place, had treated me as if I were a burden, a nuisance, someone who was there out of charity. and I wasn't going to tolerate that. Inside that envelope were documents for the house, documents that proved that that property was registered in my name and my name only. When Roberto died, the house went to me, and when Daniel married Mariana, he asked me if they could live there because his apartment was too small. I, like the doting mother I always was, agreed immediately. More than that, I renovated the entire house to accommodate the couple, spent my savings to modernize the kitchen, the bathrooms, put in new flooring, paint everything. I did all this because it was for my son, because I wanted to see him happy, because I thought I was building a home for our family. But over those 5 years, Mariana had gradually pushed me into the corners. First, there were small things, subtle comments about how I cooked too spicy, about how I watched TV too loud, about how I received my friends too frequently. Then she started redecorating the house to her taste, removing the family photos I had on the walls and putting up abstract paintings with no meaning at all. She changed the curtains I had chosen, replaced the living room furniture without consulting me, turned the guest room into an office for herself without even asking if I agreed. And Daniel, my son, my only son, always sided with her, saying that I needed to adapt to modern times, that the house now belonged to a young couple, and that I needed to understand their needs. I understood everything. I understood that Mariana wanted to get me out of there. I understood that she was gradually pushing me out of my own house, making me feel increasingly out of place, increasingly unwanted, until one day I would simply give up and leave of my own accord. She was smart, I had to admit. She was never rude in front of Daniel, always kept up appearances, always acted as if she was trying to make peace with me when he was around. But when we were alone, when it was just her and me, the mask fell, and I saw who she really was. An ambitious, calculating woman who had married my son not out of love, but because he had a good job, because he came from a family with property, because she saw in him an opportunity to move up in life. And I, the mother-in-law, was just an obstacle in her way, an obstacle she was determined to remove. But she made a fatal mistake that Sunday. She underestimated old Celia. She thought I was just a 62-year-old woman, widowed, dependent on my son, without many options in life. She didn't know that I had saved every penny I received from Roberto's pension, that I had invested that money wisely with the help of a nephew who works in the financial market, that over the years I had accumulated a considerable amount that was invested and earning interest. She also didn't know that I had kept in touch with several people from my old seamstress profession, people who now had stores, studios, prosperous businesses, and who always told me that if I wanted to return to the market, they would have a place for me. And most importantly, she didn't know that I had received 3 months before that fateful Sunday a proposal to move to Florianopolis and work in a custom clothing boutique that belonged to a former client of mine who had made a fortune and who remembered the quality of my work. The proposal included a furnished apartment facing the sea, an excellent salary, and profit sharing in the boutique. I had kept this proposal as a plan B, as something I might consider in the future, when Daniel had children and I wanted to give more space for his family to grow. But at that moment, with Mariana's words still echoing in my head, I decided that the future had arrived. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed Monica's number, the owner of the boutique in Florianopolis. It was almost 4 p.m. on a Sunday, but I knew she would answer because she had always been a workaholic woman, always available, always doing business. She answered on the second ring. "Monica, it's Celia," I said, trying to control the emotion in my voice. "Is that proposal you made me still on the table?" There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard her animated voice responding that yes, the proposal was still valid, that in fact, she was anxious to have someone with my experience and talent working with her. She told me that the apartment was ready, that I could move whenever I wanted, that she already had a clientele waiting for personalized pieces, and that the beachwear and party fashion market in Florianopolis was booming like never before. I took a deep breath and said I accepted, that I could start in 2 weeks, that I just needed to organize some things before moving. Monica was euphoric, started talking about the plans she had for the boutique, about the partnerships she was establishing, about fashion events that would take place in the city. I listened to her with a smile growing on my face, a smile I hadn't felt in a long time. When I hung up the phone, I felt lighter, more alive, more myself than I had felt in recent years. I looked around my kitchen, that kitchen I had renovated with so much care, and I realized I no longer felt any attachment to that place. Not after what Mariana had said, not after being treated like an intruder in my own house. That same night, when Daniel came home from work, I was in the living room watching TV as if nothing had happened. Mariana was locked in her room, probably talking to friends on the phone, making plans for the barbecue next Sunday. My son threw himself on the couch next to me and asked if I was okay, if anything had happened. I said everything was great and asked about his day. We chatted about trivial things for a few minutes until Mariana came out of the room and came to the living room, greeting Daniel with a kiss and completely ignoring me. She started talking about the barbecue, about who they were going to invite, about the shopping list they needed to make. Daniel seemed excited about the idea, and I just listened in silence, letting them make plans. At no point did they ask me if I wanted to participate, if I was going to be home that day, if I had any suggestions. It was as if I were invisible, as if I really had no place in that house. But I said nothing. I just smiled and said I was going to my room because I was tired. Before leaving the living room, I said goodnight to both of them, and Daniel responded distractedly without taking his eyes off his cell phone. Mariana didn't even bother to respond. In the following days, I began to organize my departure in silence. I separated the clothes I was going to take, made a list of the furniture and personal items I wanted to send to Florianopolis, contacted a moving company, and scheduled everything for Thursday of the following week, 3 days before Mariana's barbecue. I also contacted my lawyer, Dr. Henrique, who had handled the legal procedures after Roberto's death and who knew the whole situation with the house. I scheduled a meeting with him to deal with some important matters. On Wednesday, I went to his office in the city center. Dr. Henrique was a gentleman of about 70 years old, very proper and professional, and he received me with his usual cordiality. I explained the whole situation to him, told him about Mariana's behavior, about how I was being treated in my own house, about the job offer in Florianopolis, and about my decision to move. He listened to me attentively, taking notes, and when I finished speaking, he took off his glasses, cleaned the lenses with a tissue, and looked at me with a serious expression. "Donna Celia, you have every right to do what you're planning," he said. "The house is registered in your name. You are the sole legal owner of the property. Your son and daughter-in-law are living there as your guests by your concession. If you decide you want them to leave, they will have to leave." I nodded, absorbing those words. I knew that theoretically, but hearing it from the lawyer, so clearly and directly, gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in a long time. Dr. Henrique continued explaining that I had some options. I could simply inform them I was moving and let them continue living there. I could sell the house and split the money with my son, or I could ask them to leave and put the house up for rent or sale. Each option had its implications, and he helped me think through each one. After much discussion, I made my decision. I was going to move to Florianopolis and was going to let Daniel and Mariana continue living there, but with a condition I would make very clear. The house would remain in my name, and they would pay me a fair monthly rent, a reasonable but not excessive amount, which would be deposited monthly into my account. Additionally, I would maintain the right to return to the house whenever I wanted, since it was my property. Dr. Henrique prepared a loan-for-use agreement detailing all these points, and we scheduled a meeting for Saturday, 1 day before the barbecue, where I would gather Daniel and Mariana to communicate my decisions and sign the necessary documents. That Thursday, the moving truck arrived at 7 in the morning. Daniel had already left for work, and Mariana was sleeping because she had the habit of waking up late on days when she had no commitments. I had planned everything so that the move would happen while she was sleeping, and it worked. The company employees were extremely efficient and discreet. In less than 3 hours, all my most important belongings were boxed and on the truck. Bedroom furniture, clothes, books, family photos, the paintings Mariana had removed from the walls, kitchen utensils that were mine, everything was carefully packed and loaded. I left only the essentials to spend a few more days in the house, some basic clothes and personal hygiene items. When the employees finished, I took one last walk through the rooms of the house. I passed through the kitchen where I had spent so many hours cooking for my family, through the living room where Daniel had grown up playing, through the bedroom I had shared with Roberto for so many years. I felt a pang of nostalgia, but not regret. That house had been my life for decades, but now it only represented pain and disrespect. It was time to move on. Mariana only appeared in the living room around noon, already dressed and ready, probably to go out with friends as she usually did. She didn't even notice that several of my furniture pieces had disappeared, or if she did, she didn't comment. I was sitting on the porch, reading a book, when she passed by me to leave, and she just nodded her head without saying a word. I returned the nod with a smile that she must have found strange, but she didn't ask anything. She just left, slamming the door behind her. That afternoon, I called Daniel at work and said we needed to talk, me, him, and Mariana, and that I had scheduled a meeting on Saturday morning at Dr. Henrique's office. Daniel seemed worried and asked if everything was okay, if there was a problem. I said everything was fine, that it was just an important matter I needed to discuss with both of them, and that it was important that both be present. He agreed, still a bit confused, and said he would let Mariana know. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. There were only 2 days left until the meeting, 2 days until I would finally say everything I had kept in my chest for so long. On Friday, I woke up early and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. It was the last time I would do this in that house, and I wanted to make a special breakfast with those cheese breads Daniel had loved since he was a child, fresh orange juice, cut fruit, cornmeal cake. When Daniel came down to the kitchen, he was surprised by the abundant table. "Mom, what special occasion is this?" he asked with a smile, serving himself cheese bread. I said it wasn't a special occasion, that I just felt like preparing breakfast like in the old days. We ate together, talking about trivial matters, and for a few minutes I was able to forget everything that had happened and simply enjoy that moment with my son. Mariana only came down when it was almost 10 in the morning, and this time she at least said good morning, although with a coldness that was already habitual. She served herself coffee and some fruit, and stayed on her cell phone while eating, without participating in the conversation. I watched her in silence, thinking about how she had changed my son, how Daniel had become more distant, colder, more like her every day. And that saddened me deeply, but I knew I couldn't do anything about it anymore. Everyone makes their choices in life, and Daniel had made his. On Saturday morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, the three of us were sitting in the conference room at Dr. Henrique's office. Daniel and Mariana seemed confused and a bit apprehensive, especially when they saw that there were documents scattered on the table and that the lawyer had a serious expression on his face. Dr. Henrique began the meeting by thanking everyone for their presence and saying he was there at my request to deal with matters related to the property of the house where they lived. Daniel frowned and looked at me with a questioning expression. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked. Before I could respond, Dr. Henrique explained that the house was registered exclusively in my name, that I was the sole legal owner of the property, and that therefore any decision about the use of the property was up to me. Daniel turned pale. He knew the house had belonged to his father, but I think over the years he had assumed that somehow the house was also his, that he had rights to it. Mariana, on the other hand, was visibly irritated. She crossed her arms and looked at me with a hard expression. "What exactly do you mean by that, Donna Celia?" she asked with a sharp tone. That's when I finally spoke. With a calmness I didn't know I had, I explained to them that in recent years I had felt increasingly out of place in my own house, that I had been treated like an intruder, that my presence seemed to bother them, especially Mariana. I told them about the comments she made, about how she had gradually pushed me into corners, about how she had transformed the house without consulting me, acting as if she owned it. Daniel tried to interrupt me several times, saying I was exaggerating, that it wasn't like that at all, but I raised my hand and asked him to let me finish. Then I told them about what had happened the previous Sunday, about how Mariana had walked into the kitchen and told me, to my face, that I didn't know my place, that it was no longer my house, that I lived there out of their generosity. When I finished telling the story, there were tears in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I had cried too much over that week, and now it was time to be strong. Daniel was speechless, looking at Mariana with an expression of shock. Mariana, for her part, had turned red, but didn't deny anything I had said. She just remained silent, with her lips pressed into a thin line. Dr. Henrique took advantage of the silence to continue explaining the legal situation. He said I had every right to ask them to leave the house immediately if I wanted, but that I had decided to be generous and allow them to continue living there. However, there would be conditions. He presented the loan for use agreement he had prepared, explaining that from that moment on, Daniel and Mariana would pay monthly rent at market value for the house, that the property would remain registered in my name, and that I would have the right to return to the house whenever I wanted, since it was mine. Additionally, any structural or decorative modification to the house would require my prior approval. Daniel seemed to be in a state of shock. He kept looking at me, at the lawyer, at the documents on the table, as if he couldn't process what was happening. "Mom, are you kicking us out of the house?" he finally managed to ask with a trembling voice. "No, Daniel," I responded firmly. "I'm letting you live in my house under fair conditions. The difference is that now it's clear whose house it is and what the rules are. You can accept the conditions and continue living there, or you can refuse and look for another place to live." "The choice is yours," Mariana exploded. She got up from her chair abruptly, almost tipping the chair backwards. "This is absurd," she shouted. "You can't do this to us. We've lived in that house for 5 years, we've taken care of the house, we've paid the bills." Dr. Henrique intervened calmly, explaining that actually, according to the receipts he had on hand, I was the one who had paid most of the house bills in recent years, including property tax, maintenance fees, renovations, and upkeep. Daniel contributed to some day-to-day expenses, but most of the fixed costs were paid by me with money from Roberto's pension. Mariana turned even redder upon hearing this, realizing that the narrative she had built in her head, that they were supporting the house and doing me a favor by letting me live there, was completely wrong. Daniel put his hand on Mariana's arm, asking her to calm down, but she pushed him away abruptly. She looked at me with a hatred I had never seen before in anyone's eyes. "You planned all this, didn't you?" she said with a voice full of venom. "You were waiting for the right moment to humiliate us, to take revenge for things you imagined in your head." "I didn't imagine anything, Mariana," I responded, keeping my voice calm. "You yourself said I didn't know my place, so I decided to find out what my place is, and I discovered that my place is no longer in that house, being disrespected and treated like a burden. My place is where I'm valued, where I'm respected, where I can live in peace. And I found that place." That's when I told them about the job offer in Florianopolis, about Monica's boutique, about the apartment facing the sea, about the new beginning I was about to have. Daniel looked completely lost. He kept looking at me as if he were seeing a stranger in front of him. "Mom, are you serious?" he asked with a weak voice. "Are you really leaving?" "I am, Daniel," I responded, feeling a tightness in my heart. "I'm leaving because I no longer have a place here, because your wife made it very clear that I'm not welcome in my own house, and because I deserve to be happy too. I deserve to live without having to hear insults, without having to feel inferior, without having to ask permission to exist in the space I built myself." There was a long silence in the room. Mariana had sat down again, but was clearly furious, breathing heavily, with her hands clenched in fists on her lap. Daniel had his head down, and I could see he was fighting back tears. "Doctor," Henrique discreetly pushed the contract toward them and said they had until the end of the week to decide whether they accepted the conditions or preferred to look for another place to live. I got up from the chair, grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. Before leaving, I looked at my son one more time. Daniel, I will always love you. You are my only son and always will be. But I will no longer accept being disrespected because of your marriage. If you and Mariana want to have a healthy relationship with me, you're going to have to learn to treat me with respect. Otherwise, I prefer to keep my distance. The decision is yours. And then I left the room, leaving them there with the lawyer to discuss the details of the contract. The next day, Sunday, was the day of the barbecue that Mariana had planned. I was no longer in the house. I had spent the night in a comfortable hotel in the city center, sleeping better than I had slept in months. On Monday morning, I boarded a flight to Florianopolis. Monica picked me up at the airport with a huge smile on her face, and on the way to the apartment, she told me about all the plans she had for the boutique, about the clients who were already eager to see my work, about the fashion events that were coming. The apartment was even more beautiful than in the photos she had sent me. It was a large and bright space with a huge balcony facing the sea, tastefully decorated with everything I needed. When I entered that apartment and saw the blue sea through the window, I finally let the tears flow. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of new beginnings, of freedom. I was 62 years old, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like my life was just beginning. The first weeks in Florianopolis were intense. I dove headfirst into the work at the boutique. Monica had a demanding and sophisticated clientele, women who valued quality and exclusivity. I started by creating some pieces for the store's inventory: party dresses, tailored suits, distinctive beachwear. My work quickly caught attention. Clients praised the finishes, the perfect fits, the details that made all the difference. Within a few weeks, I already had a list of custom orders. I woke up early every day excited to go to work, something I hadn't felt in years. I spent afternoons at the boutique serving clients, taking measurements, choosing fabrics, designing styles. Mornings I dedicated to sewing the pieces in the small studio at the back of the store. I had forgotten how good it was to do what I loved, how gratifying it was to see a client try on a piece I had made and see her face light up when she looked at herself in the mirror. Monica was thrilled with the results, saying I had been the best hire she had ever made. On weekends, I explored the city. I walked along the waterfront, discovered new restaurants, made new friends. I joined a group of ladies who met every week to walk on the beach in the morning, and it was amazing to discover that there were so many women my age who had also restarted their lives after 60 strong, independent women, full of stories to tell. During the first weeks, Daniel tried to contact me several times. He called every day, sent messages, asked to talk. I responded politely but briefly, saying I was well, that I was adapting to my new life, but that I needed time for myself. He insisted, said we needed to talk about what had happened, that he had no idea Mariana was treating me that way, that he wanted to fix things. I said I believed him, but that the problem wasn't just Mariana. The problem was that he had allowed it to happen, that he had sided with her in all situations, that he had gradually put me aside until I became practically invisible in my own house. And that hurt more than anything Mariana had said or done. Daniel was silent when I said these things, because he knew it was true. At the end of the first week after the meeting at the lawyer's office, Daniel called me to say that they had signed the loan for use agreement, that they would pay the rent as agreed, and that Mariana had agreed to all the conditions, although she was extremely hurt. I said I was sorry she was hurt, but that the consequences of one's own actions sometimes hurt. He didn't respond to that. At the end of my second month in Florianopolis, I woke up on a Saturday morning with a strange feeling. It was Daniel's birthday. He was turning 35. I had always prepared birthday parties for him, always made his favorite cake, always gathered family and friends to celebrate. For the first time in his life, I wasn't there on my son's birthday. I sat on the apartment balcony with a cup of coffee and looked at the sea, thinking about all the birthday mornings of his I had experienced. I remembered when he was born, that rainy autumn day when I held him in my arms for the first time and promised I would always be there for him. I remembered all the childhood birthdays, the themed parties I organized, the decorated cakes I made, the gifts I struggled to buy even when money was tight. I remembered his 15th birthday, a few months before Roberto died, when the three of us had dinner together at a simple but cozy restaurant, and Roberto had made an emotional speech about how proud he was of the son we had raised. Tears rolled down my face as I remembered all this. Even with everything that had happened, even with the pain I was feeling, Daniel was still my son, and I still loved him unconditionally. I picked up my cell phone and sent him a message. A short but sincere message wishing him happy birthday, saying I was thinking of him and sending all my love. His response came a few hours later. It was a long message, different from the other brief messages we had exchanged in recent weeks. Daniel said he missed me, that the house seemed empty without me, that he had done some deep reflection on everything that had happened, and that he recognized he had been wrong, that he had remained silent when he should have defended me, that he had prioritized pleasing Mariana over my happiness. He said that Mariana was also feeling bad, that she had realized she had gone too far, that her friends had made comments during the barbecue about how strange it was that I wasn't there, about how they had always thought I was a wonderful mother-in-law. He said he would really like me to come visit them, that we could talk calmly, that he wanted to show me that things could be different. I read that message several times. Part of me wanted to believe that things could really change, that Daniel had really understood how much he had hurt me. But another part of me, a wiser part that had strengthened in those 2 months away, knew that real changes take time, and that I couldn't just go back and pretend nothing had happened. I responded to him saying that I had received the message, that I appreciated his words, but that I was happy in Florianopolis, that I had found a new purpose in my life, and that for now I preferred to keep things as they were. But I promised that during the December holidays, which were approaching, I would come back to visit them and spend a few days there. The following months passed quickly. Work at the boutique was getting better and better. Monica had expanded the business and opened a second store in a luxury shopping mall in the city, and she invited me to be a minority partner in the enterprise. I invested part of my savings in the business and began to have a share in the profits. For the first time in my life, I was building solid financial independence, something that was mine alone, that no one could take from me. I had my own robust bank account, my own apartment, my own business. I didn't depend on anyone. And that feeling was liberating in a way I had never experienced before. Even during my marriage to Roberto, although we were very happy, there was a natural financial dependence of the time. He worked, I took care of the house, and did some occasional sewing jobs. Now it was different. I was completely independent, and that gave me a confidence that showed in everything I did. People noticed. The boutique clients commented on how I seemed radiant, on how I had contagious energy. The new friends I had made said I inspired them to also pursue their dreams, regardless of age. In November, Daniel called me again. This time his voice was different, lighter, more genuinely happy. He told me that he and Mariana had started couples therapy, that they were working on issues in their relationship, including family dynamics and respecting boundaries. He said that Mariana had written a letter to me, a letter he could send me by email if I allowed it. I said yes, that he could send it. The letter arrived that same night. It was long and, to my surprise, seemed genuine. Mariana apologized for her behavior, acknowledged that she had been disrespectful and unfair to me, admitted that she had let her insecurity and desire for control speak louder than common sense. She explained that she had grown up in a very dysfunctional family, where her mother's mother-in-law had made her mother's life hell, and that she had developed a distorted belief that mothers-in-law were always controlling and problematic figures. That's why she had assumed a defensive and hostile posture toward me from the beginning, without ever giving me a real chance to show who I was. The letter ended with a sincere request for forgiveness and a hope that we could restart our relationship from scratch when I came back to visit them. I was impressed by the letter. It was difficult to write something so vulnerable and honest, and I could feel there was sincerity there. It didn't mean I had forgotten everything that had happened, but it meant that perhaps there was hope of building something better in the future. I responded to her thanking her for the letter, saying I appreciated her honesty and that I was willing to try to rebuild our relationship when I returned. In December, as I had promised, I boarded a flight back to my old city to spend a week with Daniel and Mariana. When I arrived at the airport, they were both waiting for me. Daniel hugged me tight and held my face in his hands, looking at me as if trying to memorize every detail. "You look beautiful, Mom," he said, with tears in his eyes. "You look 10 years younger." Mariana stood a little behind, clearly nervous. When Daniel stepped away, she approached timidly and offered me a hug. It was a hesitant, somewhat awkward hug, but I returned it sincerely. "Thank you for coming, Donna Celia," she said quietly. "The house isn't the same without you." We returned to the house that had been mine for so many years, but now seemed strange. They had made some changes to the decor, but this time they had consulted me beforehand by message, showing photos and asking my opinion. The room that had been mine was prepared for my stay with new bedding and fresh flowers in a vase on the dresser. At the first dinner together, we talked for hours. We talked about what had happened, about everyone's feelings, about the hurts and misunderstandings. It was a difficult but necessary conversation. Daniel cried when he asked me for forgiveness for having failed me as a son, for having let me feel out of place in my own house. Mariana also cried when she talked about her insecurities and how she had projected her traumas onto me. I also cried, releasing months of accumulated pain. But at the end of that night, I felt a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It didn't mean everything was resolved, but it meant we were on the right path. During that week, I spent quality time with my son. We did things we hadn't done in years, like cooking together, watching old movies he liked when he was a child, visiting places that had been important to our family. Mariana participated in some of these moments, and gradually we built a more comfortable interaction between us. On my last day of that visit, I prepared a special lunch for them. I made the Swiss roll Daniel loved, that same Swiss roll I was preparing when Mariana said I didn't know my place. But this time, I prepared that Swiss roll in my old kitchen not as the owner of the house, but as a visitor who was gifting her hosts with a meal made with love. And that made all the difference. During lunch, Mariana gathered courage and told me something I never expected to hear from her. "Donna Celia, I would like to ask you something," she said with a trembling voice. "When you said I didn't know my place, you were right. I really didn't. But now I understand what my place is. My place is beside Daniel, building a life with him, respecting his history, respecting you who are his mother. And I would like you to teach me some of his favorite recipes so I can make them for him when you're not here. Not to replace you, but to honor you." I felt a lump in my throat hearing those words. It was a genuine, humble, beautiful request. And I said yes, that I would be happy to teach her. We spent the afternoon in the kitchen, me teaching Mariana how to make the perfect Swiss roll, explaining the secrets of each step, sharing stories about Daniel as a child while we cooked. It was one of the most special moments of that visit. When I returned to Florianopolis, I took with me a sense of peace I didn't have when I left. Things weren't perfect. There was still a long way to go, but there was hope. And more important than that, there was respect. I was no longer treated as a burden, as someone who didn't know her place. I had found my place, and my place was wherever I chose to be. Sometimes it was in Florianopolis, building my new life, working at the boutique, enjoying the sea and my new friendships. Sometimes it was visiting my son, sharing moments with him, building a new relationship with my daughter-in-law based on mutual respect. But always, always, it was a place chosen by me, where I was valued, where I was respected, where I had a voice. The following months consolidated this new dynamic. Daniel and Mariana came to visit me in Florianopolis every 2 months, and I also visited them with the same frequency. When I was there, I stayed in my old room, but now as a cherished guest, not as someone who was there out of charity. We established healthy boundaries, learned to communicate better, learned to respect each other's needs. One day, almost a year after I had moved to Florianopolis, I received a call from Daniel in the middle of the afternoon. He was euphoric. "Mom, sit down because I have news," he said, laughing. "I'm going to be a father. Mariana is pregnant." My heart almost jumped out of my chest. I was going to be a grandmother. After so many years waiting for that moment, it was finally happening. I cried with joy on the phone, asking 1,000 questions, wanting to know all the details. Daniel told me they had found out a few days ago, but wanted to be sure before telling anyone, and that I was the first person outside the couple to know. They were planning a meeting with Mariana's family to tell them too, but Daniel had insisted on telling me first. That night, I could barely sleep with so much emotion. I started mentally planning all the little outfits I was going to make for my future grandson or granddaughter, all the treats I was going to prepare. In the following months, I closely followed Mariana's pregnancy, even being in Florianopolis. Weekly video calls, daily messages, I was present in every possible way. Mariana included me in all decisions, asked me for advice, showed me the ultrasounds. She was genuinely trying to build a good relationship with me, and I could see she wanted me to be a present grandmother in the baby's life. When Mariana entered her 7th month of pregnancy, I decided to spend a longer time with them. I talked to Monica, who was absolutely understanding, and we arranged for me to stay 2 months in my old city, returning to Florianopolis only to resolve important pending matters when necessary. I stayed in the house with Daniel and Mariana, helping with the final preparations for the baby's arrival. Together, Mariana and I set up the baby's room, washed the tiny clothes, organized the diapers, and all the necessary items. It was a very special time of connection between us. She told me about her fears regarding motherhood, and I shared my experiences, reassuring her, telling her she was going to be a wonderful mother. And when the baby was finally born, a beautiful girl they named Helena, I was there at the maternity hospital, being one of the first people to hold that perfect child in my arms. I looked at that tiny face, those closed little eyes, those tiny little hands, and felt my heart overflow with love. Daniel was radiant, Mariana was exhausted but happy, and I was fulfilled in a way I didn't know was possible. I stayed 3 more weeks with them after they returned from the maternity hospital, helping with the baby, cooking, organizing the house, giving support to Mariana, who was recovering from childbirth. They were intense but wonderful weeks, and when it was time for me to return to Florianopolis, the farewell was emotional. Mariana hugged me tight and told me she didn't know what she would have done without me in those first weeks of motherhood. "Thank you for everything, Dona Celia," she said with tears in her eyes. "You are the best mother-in-law and grandmother that Helena and Daniel could have. I promise we'll visit you in Florianopolis soon so the little one can see the ocean with her grandmother." Daniel hugged me and whispered in my ear that he was proud of the strong and inspiring woman I was, that I had taught him by my example that it's never too late to start over, that it's never too late to demand respect, that it's never too late to choose one's own happiness. Back in Florianopolis, I resumed my routine with renewed vigor. The boutique was prospering more than ever. We had just closed a contract to supply exclusive pieces to a luxury resort in the region, and I was working on a capsule collection that would bear my name. My life had completely transformed since that fateful Sunday when Mariana told me I didn't know my place. She thought she was putting me down, that she was showing me I had no value, that I was just an outdated old woman without purpose. But what she didn't imagine was that those cruel words would be the catalyst for the greatest transformation of my life, because I really didn't know my place. I didn't know that my place could be wherever I wanted it to be. I didn't know that at 62 years old, I could restart a brilliant career, build financial independence, make new friends, live adventures, know self-love and freedom in a way I had never known before. I didn't know that I could establish healthy boundaries, demand respect, and still maintain the family ties that were important to me. I didn't know that I had the strength to make difficult decisions, to leave behind what was hurting me, to embrace the new and unknown. Today, more than a year and a half after that Sunday, I look back and I'm grateful for having had the courage to change. I'm grateful even for those painful words from Mariana because they were what woke me up, what made me realize I was living a life too small for me, that I was settling for crumbs of attention and respect when I deserved so much more. I learned that it's never too late to take a stand, to defend your dignity, to choose yourself. I learned that being a mother doesn't mean erasing yourself, doesn't mean accepting disrespect in the name of love for your children. I learned that true love, whether between mother and son, whether between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, whatever kind of love, needs to be built on foundations of mutual respect, and when that respect doesn't exist, there is no real love, there is only a toxic relationship disguised as family. People who know my story here in Florianopolis are impressed. Many women my age seek me out to talk, to ask for advice, because they too are in situations where they feel undervalued, where they feel they've lost their identity, where they believe it's too late to change. I always say the same thing to them. As long as you're breathing, it's never too late. If you're breathing, you have time to start over. If you're alive, you have the right to be happy, to be respected, to pursue your dreams. Age is just a number, and society may try to convince us that after a certain age, we should conform, settle, accept anything because we're past our time. But that's a lie. I'm living the best phase of my life at 64 years old. I'm more professionally fulfilled than ever. I have more friends now than I had at 30. I travel more. I try new things. I'm constantly learning. And best of all is that now I do all this knowing my worth, knowing my place, and my place is exactly where I want to be. The relationship with Daniel and Mariana today is better than it ever was. Not because we went back to what it was before, because what it was before wasn't healthy, it was just familiar and comfortable for them, but suffocating for me. It's better because now it's genuine. It's based on true respect, on clear boundaries, on honest communication. When we see each other, we genuinely enjoy each other's company. When I'm away, they miss me not because they need me to solve practical things or to serve as a babysitter, but because they really value my presence, my wisdom, my personality. And I miss them too, but not a painful and desperate longing like I felt before, when my world revolved only around being Daniel's mother. Now I feel a pleasant, healthy longing, the longing we feel for loved ones when they're far away, but we know the relationship is good, that nothing is broken, that it's just a temporary physical distance. My little granddaughter Helena is 1 year old now and is the most beautiful child in the world. I know every grandmother says that, but in my granddaughter's case, it's objectively true. She comes to visit me in Florianopolis every 2 months with her parents, and she's already starting to associate my house with good things, with the beach, with the special foods Grandma makes, with the different toys I have here for her. When she arrives, she always hugs me, and then runs to the balcony to see the ocean, clapping her little hands with joy. I have plans, when she's a little older, to spend longer periods with her here, teach her to swim, to make sandcastles, maybe even introduce her to the world of sewing if she shows interest. But all in good time, all in a healthy way, where I'm the present and loving grandmother, but who also has her own life, her own interests, her own identity beyond being a grandmother. If you're reading my story and identifying with it, if you're in a situation where you feel you no longer have a place in your own life, where you feel you've become a shadow in your own existence, I want to tell you that you have the power to change that. It won't be easy, I won't lie. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, making the decision to leave my house, to establish boundaries with my own son, to start over in a new city at 62 years old. I was very afraid. I had nights where I cried, asking myself if I was doing the right thing, if I wasn't being selfish, if I wasn't destroying my family. But today I know I wasn't destroying anything. I was actually saving myself, and ironically, also saving my family relationships, because they could only become healthy when I put myself first, when I demanded the respect I deserved. And in doing so, I taught my son a valuable lesson about respecting the people he loves. I taught my daughter-in-law that a mother-in-law is not an enemy, she's family and deserves to be treated as such. And I taught myself that I am stronger, more capable, more resilient than I imagined. So if someone in your life tells you that you don't know your place, don't accept that as a truth. Use it as a springboard. Ask yourself, do I really know what my place is? Am I in the place I chose or in the place where I was pushed? Couldn't my place be something much bigger, much better, much more rewarding than what I'm accepting now? And after asking yourself these questions, have the courage to go after the answers. Have the courage to make changes, even if they're scary, even if the people around you don't understand, even if you're afraid of failing. Because trying and failing is still better than never trying and spending the rest of your life wondering what it would have been like. And more often than you imagine, you won't fail. You'll fly. Like I flew. Like so many other women I met flew. You'll discover potentials in yourself that had been dormant for decades. You'll reconnect with dreams you had forgotten you had. You'll look in the mirror and see not an old and outdated woman, but an experienced, wise woman, full of life and possibilities. And if you're on the other side of this story, if you're the Mariana in this situation, if you're someone who has been treating an older person in your family badly, whether mother-in-law, mother, aunt, grandmother, I ask you to reflect deeply on this. These women gave up so much, sacrificed so much, gave so much of themselves to build the lives of the people they love. They deserve respect, they deserve dignity, they deserve to be valued. And if you have unresolved issues, family traumas, insecurities, seek professional help, do therapy, work on your issues, but don't take it out on people who are not to blame for your past. Because one day you will also grow old, and you'll want to be treated with respect and love. So start planting that now. Treat the older people in your life well. Value their experience, their wisdom, their love. Because when they're gone, they don't come back, and you'll carry forever the weight of how you treated them in their last years of life. Don't let that weight be of regret. Make it be of gratitude for having valued these people while they were still here. Now, sitting on my balcony in Florianopolis, with the sound of the waves in the background, with the smell of the sea in the air, with a glass of fresh passion fruit juice in my hand, I look at the horizon and smile. I smile because I found my place. Not the place Mariana thought was mine, not the place society says should be the place of a woman my age, but the place I chose. A place of freedom, of fulfillment, of self-love, of respect, of purpose. And that place is beautiful. That place is mine. And no one ever again will take that away from me. Because now I deeply know what my place is, and my place is exactly where I am, doing exactly what I'm doing, being exactly who I am. A 64-year-old woman who started over, who reinvented herself, who refused to accept crumbs when she deserved a banquet. A woman who transformed words of contempt into fuel for incredible flights. A woman who proved that it's never, never too late to choose yourself, to demand respect, to pursue happiness, to live fully. And if my story inspired you in any way, if you got this far and felt that chill in your stomach that we feel when a story touches our heart, when something resonates deeply within us, I want to ask you something. Leave a comment down below telling your story too, or telling what you felt reading mine, or simply saying that you're here, that you're fighting too, that you're trying to find your place in the world. Because these stories need to be told, these voices need to be heard, and the more we share our experiences, the more we'll inspire other people to also have the courage to change. Subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this, real stories of real people who are navigating life's challenges with courage and determination. And if you liked the content, leave your like because it helps other people also find these stories that can change their lives. Like my story may have changed something in you today. We're all together in this journey called life, and the more we support each other, the stronger each of us becomes. Thank you for reading this far. Thank you for being part of my story. And may you also find your place, that special place that only you can occupy in this immense world full of possibilities. A hug from the bottom of my heart, and until the next story.